December 7th, 1943, Philippine Sea, 140 nautical miles east of Leyte Gulf. Commander Samuel Dealey stands in the conning tower of USS Harder, SS 257, at 2:47 p.m., full daylight, periscope depth abandoned. The submarine breaks surface in bright afternoon sun, a suicidal act by all pre-war doctrine. Through binoculars, he tracks a Japanese convoy, 4 cargo ships, 2 destroyer escorts. Everything submariners were taught said, submerged attacks only, surface only at night. Within 6 hours, Dealey would sink 3 of those ships using tactics that shouldn't work, tactics that would transform submarine warfare and double American tonnage totals in 1944. The moment represents a psychological revolution, submarine crews abandoning safety protocols that had governed undersea warfare since World War I, embracing risk that seemed insane, achieving results that rewrote tactical doctrine. The story of why American submariners started surfacing in daylight, attacking from the surface, and sinking twice as many ships isn't about technology alone. It's about the gradual realization that Japanese anti-submarine capabilities were so inadequate that the ocean had become an American hunting preserve, where conventional caution was unnecessary. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The statistics tell the story. In 1942, American submarines sank 180 Japanese ships, 725,000 tons. In 1944, they sank 492 ships, 2,387,780 tons, nearly 3 times the tonnage. The difference wasn't more submarines or better torpedoes. It was tactical revolution born from accumulated evidence that Japanese forces couldn't detect, track, or destroy surfaced submarines even in broad daylight. Through his periscope in the early war, Dealey had seen what every submarine commander saw: Japanese convoys protected by destroyers they'd been trained to fear. The doctrine was clear: stay submerged. Approach slowly, wait for the perfect opportunity. Fire torpedoes from safe depth. Dive deep to escape depth charges. Never ever surface near enemy warships. But now, on this December 7th, 1943 afternoon, Dealey was breaking every rule. His submarine carved through the surface like a shark that no longer hid. His diesels roared at full power, pushing harder to 18 knots impossible speed when submerged. Lookouts scanned the horizon, searching not for places to hide but targets to destroy. The deck gun was manned, ready to engage any threat with 4-inch shells. The Japanese destroyers had spotted them. Dealey could see their black silhouettes turning toward him. By doctrine, this was the moment a submarine should crash dive immediately, disappear into the depths, abandon the attack. But Dealey stayed surfaced. He'd learned something doctrine didn't teach. The Japanese didn't know how to fight a submarine that refused to hide. The first destroyer charged across the sea. Dealey ordered a minor course change, maintaining speed, calculating the firing solution. Through his torpedo data computer site, he could see the destroyer approaching too fast, uncoordinated with its sister escort, as if panicking. Dealey's TDC hummed, solving the geometric triangle of interception. Range: 3,000 yards. Target speed: 28 knots. Bow angle: 90 degrees. Torpedoes ready, Dealey said calmly. His crew knew the routine now. They'd practiced it through 3 previous patrols, perfecting what many submarine officers still considered reckless madness. Fire 1, Fire 2, Fire 3. The Mark 14 torpedoes leaped from their tubes, their wakes tracing white lines across the dark blue water. Dealey stayed surfaced, watching, timing, 47 seconds. The explosions burst along the destroyer's flank, bright orange against steel grey. The Japanese warship broke in two, its bow rising toward the sky before sliding beneath the waves. The second destroyer hesitated. Dealey could see confusion in its movements, turning toward the surfaced submarine, then away, then toward again. That hesitation was all Dealey needed. He ordered a new course, positioning Harder for the next attack. Over the next 6 hours, Dealey and his crew would sink 2 cargo ships and severely damage a third, all from the surface, in broad daylight, under the eyes of Japanese escort ships that couldn't stop them. When Harder finally dove that night, it was by choice, not necessity. The ocean had changed hands. American submariners were just beginning to realize how completely. The story of this transformation from caution to confidence, from stealth to open aggression, from a war that sank 180 ships per year to a campaign that would sink 492, begins not with a single dramatic moment, but with thousands of encounters where American submariners gradually understood that their enemies were technologically blind, tactically rigid, and industrially incapable of responding to innovation. The submarine warfare doctrine that prevailed at the start of World War II had been forged in the blood and iron of 1914 through 1918. Every navy in the world taught the same fundamental principles. Submarines attack while submerged, using the periscope for observation. They surface only at night for battery charging and rapid transit. They avoid destroyer escorts at all costs. These rules weren't arbitrary. They represented accumulated wisdom from thousands of men who had fought and often perished in World War I's undersea warfare. The U.S. Navy's submarine school at New London, Connecticut, taught these doctrines with religious rigor. Young officers learned that surfaced submarines were vulnerable to gunfire, ramming, and air attack. A destroyer could spot a surfaced submarine at more than 10 miles in clear weather. Once spotted, the submarine had no chance. Depth charges killed easily. Survival depended on stealth. The Japanese Navy had studied under British instruction during the 1920s and 1930s, absorbing the same doctrines. European naval theorists had systematized lessons from U-boat warfare. Submarines succeeded by remaining invisible, attacking by surprise from the depths, disappearing before anti-submarine forces could respond. Surfacing near enemy warships was considered suicidal. Statistics supported this caution. Submarines were slow when submerged, only 2 to 9 knots, depending on class and battery charge. On the surface, they could make 20 knots or more, but became vulnerable. Battery life limited submerged operations to 24 to 48 hours before recharging became necessary. Average approach time for a submerged attack was 4 to 6 hours, during which the submarine maneuvered slowly into position, conserving battery power, avoiding detection. Historical precedent reinforced the doctrine. German U-boats that surfaced to engage armed merchant ships had often been sunk by surprise gunfire. Submarines, hunted by destroyers, survived only by diving deep and remaining silent. Submarine warfare meant hiding, waiting, striking from invisibility. In the early war, American submarines followed this doctrine rigidly. Submerged attacks were standard procedure. Surface attacks occurred only in desperation or at night when darkness provided protection. Commander Dudley Morton on USS Wahoo was a notable exception, aggressive but still cautious, pushing doctrine's limits without breaking it completely. Japanese anti-submarine doctrine assumed submarines would behave predictably. Destroyer escorts trained to search, aim for periscopes, listen for underwater propulsion sounds, drop depth charges in patterns calculated for submerged targets. Nobody trained to fight submarines that stayed surfaced and fought like surface ships. In 1942, American submarines averaged only 1.2 attacks per patrol. The cost of caution was evident everywhere. Limited attack opportunities. Convoys escaped while submarines maneuvered into position. Battery depletion forced broken-off attacks. Torpedo shortages meant every shot had to count. Submariners grew frustrated with missed opportunities. USS Drum's SS-228 patrol report from November 1942 exemplified the problem. 8 convoys sighted, only 2 attacked. The rest escaped while Drum maneuvered for submerged approaches that took too long or required battery power the boat couldn't spare. Commanders returned to Pearl Harbor with torpedoes unexpended, knowing they'd let targets escape because doctrine demanded. Caution over aggression. The transformation began not with planned innovation but with accidents and desperation. In January 1943, Commander Dudley Mush Morton took USS Wahoo into Wewak Harbour on the northern coast of New Guinea. His mission: sink Japanese shipping in a heavily defended anchorage. The submerged approach failed. Japanese ships detected Wahoo's periscope. Depth charges forced Morton deep. His attack opportunity was slipping away. Morton made a decision that violated every principle taught at submarine school. He surfaced Wahoo inside the harbour, among Japanese ships, in broad daylight. What happened next shocked everyone, including Morton. The Japanese seemed confused. Ships scattered without coordination. The destroyer Harusame attempted to ram but approached clumsily, allowing Wahoo to dodge while firing torpedoes that struck home. Morton used his deck gun on smaller vessels, then withdrew on the surface at maximum speed. Wahoo's after-action report contained a phrase that would echo through submarine force. Japs seemed confused, didn't coordinate response. Morton returned to Pearl Harbor as a hero, but senior officers considered his tactics reckless. The consensus? Morton had gotten lucky. Surface attacks remained officially discouraged. By June 1943, Commander Sam Dealey was having similar experiences on USS Harder. During an attack on a convoy near Palau, Harder surfaced accidentally when the diving plane jammed. Dealey expected immediate catastrophe. Instead, the Japanese destroyer escorts reacted slowly. They seemed uncertain how to handle a surface submarine. Before diving, Dealey sank 2 ships. His observation mirrored Morton's. They didn't know how to handle surface submarine. Dealey began experimenting deliberately with surface approaches. On his second patrol, he surfaced at dusk to attack a convoy, staying surfaced throughout the engagement. The Japanese destroyers fired wildly but never coordinated their response. Harder sank 3 ships and escaped undamaged. Dealey's patrol report was detailed and analytical, noting specific Japanese tactical failures. By mid-1943, a pattern was emerging in patrol reports from aggressive commanders. Japanese destroyers were ineffective against surface submarines. Depth charges were useless if the submarine stayed surfaced. Japanese gunfire accuracy was poor, especially at night. Radio intercepts showed Japanese confusion during surface attacks. One captured Japanese radio log described an American submarine fought like surface ship. The message conveyed not admiration but bewilderment. Resistance from command remained strong. Submarine Force Pacific Commander Admiral Charles Lockwood worried about casualties. Doctrine change required evidence, not anecdotes. But the tonnage numbers were beginning to show differences. Submarines using surface tactics were sinking 40% more ships per patrol. Statistical analysis was ordered. What intelligence discovered shocked the submarine force. Japanese destroyers lacked effective surface radar. Most relied entirely on visual detection. Japanese sonar was primitive compared to American systems. Japanese depth charge patterns were designed exclusively for submerged submarines. Japanese anti-submarine doctrine hadn't evolved since the 1920s. Training emphasized submerged submarine threats exclusively. The technological asymmetry was more extreme than anyone had anticipated. American submariners were following cautious doctrine against an enemy incapable of countering aggressive tactics. The ocean was an American hunting preserve. They just hadn't realized it yet. The transformation began not with planned innovation but with accidents and desperation. In January 1943, Commander Dudley Mush Morton took USS Wahoo into Wewak Harbour on the northern coast of New Guinea. His mission: sink Japanese shipping in a heavily defended anchorage. The submerged approach failed. Japanese ships detected Wahoo's periscope. Depth charges forced Morton deep. His attack opportunity was slipping away. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Morton made a decision that violated every principle taught at submarine school. He surfaced Wahoo inside the harbour, among Japanese ships, in broad daylight. What happened next shocked everyone, including Morton. The Japanese seemed confused, ships scattered without coordination. The destroyer Harusame attempted to ram but approached clumsily, allowing Wahoo to dodge while firing torpedoes that struck home. Morton used his deck gun on smaller vessels, then withdrew on the surface at maximum speed. Wahoo's after-action report contained a phrase that would echo through submarine force. Japs seemed confused, didn't coordinate response. Morton returned to Pearl Harbor as a hero, but senior officers considered his tactics reckless. The consensus: Morton had gotten lucky. Surface attacks remained officially discouraged. By June 1943, Commander Sam Dealey was having similar experiences on USS Harder. Dealey expected immediate catastrophe. Instead, the Japanese destroyer escorts reacted slowly. They seemed uncertain how to handle a surface submarine. Before diving, Dealey sank 2 ships. His observation mirrored Morton's. They didn't know how to handle surface submarine. Dealey began experimenting deliberately with surface approaches. On his second patrol, he surfaced at dusk to attack a convoy, staying surfaced throughout the engagement. The Japanese destroyers fired wildly but never coordinated their response. Harder sank 3 ships and escaped undamaged. Dealey's patrol report was detailed and analytical, noting specific Japanese tactical failures. Poor gunnery, inability to coordinate multiple escorts, hesitation when confronted with unexpected tactics. By mid-1943, a pattern was emerging in patrol reports from aggressive commanders across the Pacific. Japanese destroyers were consistently ineffective against surface submarines. Depth charges were useless if the submarine stayed surfaced. Japanese gunfire accuracy was poor, especially at night. The escorts seemed unable to adapt to submarines that fought back rather than hiding. Radio intercepts provided additional evidence. American cryptographers monitoring Japanese naval communications detected confusion during surface submarine encounters. One captured Japanese radio log described an engagement where an American submarine fought like surface ship. The message conveyed not admiration but bewilderment. Japanese commanders didn't have tactical responses for submarines that violated expected behavior patterns. Individual submarine commanders began sharing observations informally. At Pearl Harbor, between patrols, officers compared notes over drinks at the O Club. The consensus grew. Something was fundamentally wrong with Japanese anti-submarine capabilities. They weren't just weak, they were unprepared for surface engagements entirely. Resistance from command remained strong. Submarine Force Pacific Commander Admiral Charles Lockwood worried about casualties. Changing doctrine required evidence, not anecdotes. Individual successes could be luck. Systematic proof was needed. But the tonnage numbers were beginning to show undeniable differences. Submarines using surface tactics were sinking 40% more ships per patrol than those following traditional doctrine. Lockwood ordered statistical analysis. Intelligence officers compiled data from every patrol report since Pearl Harbor. The results were striking. Submarines that had surfaced during attacks, whether accidentally or deliberately, achieved higher success rates, suffered fewer casualties from depth charges, and reported less battle damage. The numbers supported what aggressive commanders had discovered through experience. Surface attacks worked. The question became, why? What made Japanese anti-submarine forces so ineffective against surface submarines when doctrine insisted surfaced boats were maximally vulnerable? The answer would come from intelligence sources that painted a picture of technological asymmetry far more extreme than American planners had imagined. What emerged from interrogations of captured Japanese sailors, analysis of recovered equipment, and signals intelligence was a portrait of an enemy navy fighting World War II with World War I anti-submarine doctrine and inferior technology. Japanese destroyers lacked effective surface radar. Their sonar was primitive. Their depth charges were designed exclusively for submerged targets. Their training emphasized threats that hid underwater, not submarines that fought on the surface. The ocean was an American hunting preserve. The submarines operating in it just hadn't realized it yet. But by late 1943, enough evidence had accumulated that the realization was becoming inevitable. The doctrine that governed submarine warfare since World War I was obsolete, not because submarines had become less vulnerable, but because the enemy lacked the capabilities doctrine assumed all naval forces possessed. What American intelligence discovered in late 1943 shocked even the most optimistic analysts. Japanese destroyers lacked effective surface radar. This wasn't a minor deficiency, it was a catastrophic gap that fundamentally undermined their anti-submarine capabilities. While American submarines carried SJ surface search radar capable of detecting ships at 15 miles or more, most Japanese destroyers relied entirely on visual observation. In darkness, fog, or heavy weather, they were effectively blind. The few Japanese destroyers equipped with Type 22 radar-possessed systems with maximum ranges around 10 kilometers and reliability problems that frequently rendered them useless. American submarines could detect Japanese ships long before being detected in return. This asymmetry transformed night surface operations from risky to virtually risk-free. American submarines could track convoys from beyond visual range, position themselves ahead of targets, and attack with information advantages Japanese commanders couldn't counter. The radar gap extended beyond detection. American submarines used radar for navigation, collision avoidance, and tactical maneuvering that Japanese forces couldn't perform. An American submarine surfaced at night, operated in a technological environment its enemy couldn't perceive. The ocean's surface belonged to whoever could see furthest, and American radar gave submariners eyes that penetrated darkness and distance. Japanese sonar systems were equally primitive compared to American technology. While not critical for surface engagements, the sonar disparity meant that even when submarines dove, Japanese destroyers struggled to maintain contact. American submariners monitoring Japanese sonar transmissions reported crude, easily evaded patterns. The sophisticated acoustic tracking American forces feared from their own anti-submarine units simply didn't exist in Japanese destroyer squadrons. Depth charge limitations proved even more decisive. Japanese Type 95 depth charges carried 150 kilograms of explosive, set to detonate at preset depths between 30 and 300 feet. The charges were effective against submerged submarines caught in proper patterns, but against a surfaced submarine, they were completely useless. A destroyer had to close to ramming distance to threaten a surface submarine directly, an approach that exposed the destroyer to submarine torpedo and deck gunfire. American submarines carried 4-inch 50 caliber or 5-inch 25 caliber deck guns that outranged destroyer light guns. In surface engagements, submarines possessed firepower advantage at medium ranges. Japanese destroyers, mounting 3-inch or smaller anti-aircraft weapons, couldn't engage effectively beyond 3,000 yards. Submarine gunners, trained and experienced, could hit targets at 5,000 yards or more. The tactical mathematics favored the submarine in surface gunfights, an impossible situation by pre-war doctrine. Fire control disparity amplified every other advantage. American submarines used torpedo data computers that automatically calculated firing solutions, accounting for target course, speed, range, and torpedo characteristics. The TDC allowed accurate torpedo fire, while the submarine maneuvered at 18 knots or more on the surface. Japanese destroyers lacked equivalent technology. Their fire control relied on manual calculations taking longer, creating errors, and requiring the ship to maintain steady courses that made them vulnerable. American submarines could fire torpedoes accurately while executing evasive maneuvers. Japanese escorts struggled to coordinate attacks on moving surface targets. The result was confusion, hesitation, and failed interceptions. American submarine commanders watching through binoculars reported Japanese destroyers turning toward them, then away, then toward again. Tactical indecision, born from encountering threats their doctrine and training hadn't prepared them to handle. The psychological factor proved as important as technological gaps. Japanese destroyer crews trained extensively to hunt submerged submarines. They practiced sonar operation, depth charge patterns, and coordinated searches for underwater contacts. They did not train to fight submarines that stayed surfaced and fought back. When confronted with surface submarines, Japanese crews faced tactical situations their training hadn't covered. Confusion led to hesitation. Hesitation led to poor coordination. American submariners began noting consistent patterns in Japanese responses. They don't know what to do. The observation appeared repeatedly in patrol reports. Japanese destroyers would approach aggressively, then break off. They would fire wildly without accurate ranging. They would fail to coordinate multiple escorts into effective attack patterns. Their responses suggested not cowardice, but genuine tactical confusion encountering an enemy that broke all assumptions about how submarines should behave. By early 1944, the evidence was overwhelming. Japanese anti-submarine forces were technologically inferior, doctrinally rigid, and psychologically unprepared for surface submarine tactics. The ocean had become an American domain not through superior numbers but through exploitation of enemy weaknesses that doctrine had prevented American forces from discovering earlier. In October 1943, Commander Richard O'Kane took command of USS Tang with a radical plan. Unlike previous commanders who had stumbled into surface tactics through accident or desperation, O'Kane intended to make surface attacks his primary method from the start. His first patrol as captain would prove that surface warfare wasn't reckless improvisation, it was the future of submarine combat. O'Kane had served as executive officer under Dudley Morton on Oahu, witnessing Morton's aggressive tactics firsthand. He'd seen how Japanese forces reacted to surface submarines: confusion, poor coordination, tactical paralysis. Now commanding his own boat, O'Kane would systematize what Morton had pioneered. Surface attacks would become doctrine, not deviation. Tang's first war patrol targeted shipping lanes near the Caroline Islands. O'Kane surfaced deliberately for every attack. He approached targets on the surface, fired torpedoes while surfaced, and stayed surfaced to observe results. His after-action reports detailed methodology with scientific precision: approach angles, firing solutions, Japanese response patterns, damage assessment. This wasn't cowboy heroics, it was tactical innovation documented for replication. By Tang's third war patrol in June 1944, O'Kane had refined surface tactics to devastating effectiveness. 5 ships sunk, all via surface attacks, average attack time reduced from 6 hours to 2, multiple attacks per night on the same convoy. Tang would use her deck gun on small vessels to conserve torpedoes, engaging targets with 4-inch shells that Japanese escorts couldn't effectively counter. O'Kane's patrol reports became required reading at submarine school. The Wolfpack concept emerged simultaneously with surface tactics, and the two innovations proved mutually reinforcing. 3 submarines operating together could coordinate surface attacks that overwhelmed Japanese escorts completely. Communication by radio, impossible when submerged, became standard. Submarines could vector each other toward targets, coordinate simultaneous attacks from multiple directions, and share tactical intelligence in real time. Ben's Busters, in October 1943, demonstrated Wolfpack potential. 3 submarines, Cabrilla, Capelin, and Cisco, coordinated a night surface attack on a large convoy. They sank 7 ships while Japanese escorts scattered trying to respond to threats from multiple directions. The escorts couldn't protect all flanks simultaneously. Each submarine attracted attention. creating opportunities for the others. It was surface naval warfare, but the surface ships were submarines exploiting tactical flexibility their enemy couldn't match. Tactical evolution accelerated. The traditional end-around maneuver, where submarines surfaced to run ahead of convoys before diving to attack, was abandoned. Why dive at all? Submarines stayed surfaced, used their 20-knot speed advantage to position ahead of convoys, then attacked surfaced. Attack time collapsed from 6 hours to 2. Submarines made multiple attacks per night on the same convoy, retiring between strikes to reload tubes, then returning for more. Japanese escort destroyers faced impossible tactical problems. They couldn't protect all approaches. They couldn't coordinate responses to multiple surface threats. Their depth charges were useless. Their gunfire was inaccurate. Their sonar couldn't track surfaced targets. American submarines exploited every weakness systematically. Statistical validation came swiftly. Tang's 5 patrols from October 1943 through October 1944 sank 24 ships, totaling 93,824 tons. USS Flasher achieved the war's highest tonnage, 21 ships, 100,231 tons. USS Barb under Eugene Fluckey sank 17 ships using aggressive surface tactics. The numbers were undeniable. Submarine force. Pacific analysis, in December 1943, confirmed what individual patrol reports suggested. Surface attacks were 2.3 times more effective than submerged attacks. Average tonnage per patrol doubled for submarines using surface tactics. The doctrine that had governed submarine warfare since World War I was obsolete. American submariners had discovered a better way. Admiral Lockwood, initially skeptical, became surface tactics' strongest advocate. Patrol orders began explicitly authorizing surface attacks. Submarine school curriculum was revised. New commanders were taught O'Kane's methods as standard procedure. By early 1944, surface warfare had transformed from controversial experiment to official doctrine. The psychological transformation was as important as tactical change. Submarine crews no longer feared destroyers. They hunted them. Commander Dealey's famous signal, "Destroyer down the hatch." Treating enemy warships as prey rather than threat captured the new mentality. Confidence bred aggression. Aggression bred innovation. Innovation bred results. Young commanders arriving at Pearl Harbor absorbed the new culture immediately. They saw veterans like O'Kane, Fluckey, and Dealey treated as heroes. They read patrol reports describing surface battles where submarines dominated. They understood that caution meant missed opportunities, while aggression meant success. The submarine force had transformed from defensive hunters to offensive predators. By mid-1944, the transformation was complete. American submarines routinely surfaced in daylight, attacked convoys in broad view of escorts, and withdrew successfully. The ocean had become American territory, where submarines operated with impunity Japanese forces couldn't challenge. Japanese Naval Command recognized the submarine problem by early 1944, but recognition came far too late. Merchant marine losses had reached catastrophic levels. In 1943 alone, American submarines sank 1.8 million tons of shipping. The empire's maritime logistics were collapsing. Rice couldn't reach Japan from Southeast Asia. Oil couldn't reach refineries from the Dutch East Indies. The war economy was being strangled by submarines that Japanese forces couldn't stop. The convoy system was reorganized. Anti-submarine doctrine revision was ordered. New training protocols for destroyer crews were developed. But these responses addressed the wrong problem. Japanese planners assumed American submarines were succeeding through superior stealth and submerged tactics. They didn't understand that American submarines were succeeding by staying surfaced and exploiting Japanese technological inferiority. Captured Japanese documents revealed growing desperation. A Fourth Fleet operational report from March 1944 stated bluntly, "American submarines attacking on surface with impunity." A destroyer captain's diary captured the tactical confusion. We are trained to fight submarines that hide underwater, not ones that fight back. Instructions to merchant captains reflected hopelessness. Zigzag course. Maximum speed. Pray. Japanese countermeasures failed for fundamental reasons. Industrial capacity couldn't produce sufficient escort vessels. Shipyards prioritized carriers and battleships for fleet operations. Anti-submarine warfare received inadequate resources. By mid-1944, only 59% of Japanese destroyers had radar, and even equipped destroyers had systems inferior to American technology. Training time was inadequate. Veteran destroyer crews were being transferred to fleet units for expected decisive battle with American surface forces. Replacement crews lacked experience and received abbreviated training. The institutional knowledge of anti-submarine warfare was evaporating precisely when it was most needed. American submariners noted decreasing Japanese competence in patrol reports throughout 1944. The technology gap widened rather than narrowed. American submarines received improved SJ radar in 1944 with better range and reliability. They received FM sonar for mine detection, enabling navigation through defensive minefields. They received better torpedoes, electric Mark 18 leaving no wake, acoustic Mark 24 homing on propeller noise. Japanese naval forces received nothing equivalent. Production remained focused on fleet units for surface battles that never occurred. The most dramatic example of Japanese anti-submarine failure came in June 1944 when USS Harder encountered a Japanese destroyer force actively hunting submarines near Tawi-Tawi. Over 3 days, Harder sank 3 destroyers, Minatsuki, Hayanami, and Tanikaze. The hunters became prey. Japanese destroyers attempting to kill Harder instead provided targets for a submarine that refused to hide. Commander Dealey's tactics during this engagement demonstrated how completely surface warfare had evolved. Harder detected destroyers on radar before they saw her. Dealey positioned Harder for optimal torpedo angles. When destroyers approached, he fired from the surface at close range, then stayed surface to observe results. The destroyers never coordinated effective responses. They charged individually, fired wildly, and died systematically. Personnel quality decline accelerated throughout 1944. Experienced destroyer captains were killed or transferred. Replacement officers lacked tactical sophistication their predecessors had developed. Training focused on fleet battle scenarios, not anti-submarine warfare. By late 1944, Japanese destroyer forces were shadows of their early war capability, undermanned, under-equipped, inadequately trained, and facing enemies who exploited every weakness. Captured Japanese naval officers interrogated after the war confirmed that anti-submarine warfare had become a hopeless mission by mid-1944. They described sailing on convoy escort duty, knowing they couldn't protect merchant ships from American submarines. They described technical inferiority so extreme that Japanese destroyers were effectively helpless against surface submarine attacks. They described watching submarines surface in daylight, attack convoys, and withdraw while escorts flailed uselessly. The Japanese response to surface submarine tactics was too little, too late. Industrial capacity was insufficient. Technology was inferior. Training was inadequate. Tactical doctrine was obsolete. By the time Japanese forces understood what American submarines were doing, they lacked the resources, technology, and personnel to counter it effectively. The ocean belonged to American submarines, and Japanese forces could only watch helplessly as their merchant marine was systematically destroyed. The psychological transformation of American submariners between 1942 and 1945 represented one of the most dramatic cultural shifts in military history. In the early war, submariners were terrified of destroyers. Doctrine taught that destroyer encounters meant death. Depth charges could crush submarine hulls at 300 feet. Ramming could split a submarine open. Destroyers were predators. Submarines were prey that survived through stealth and evasion. By mid-war, the relationship had inverted completely. Submariners were hunting destroyers deliberately. Commander Sam Dealey's famous signal, "Destroyer down the hatch," captured the new mentality perfectly. Destroyers weren't threats to be avoided, they were targets to be destroyed. Dealey hunted destroyers for sport, tracking them specifically to add warship kills to his tally. The cultural shift within the submarine force was total and irreversible. Training evolution reflected and reinforced this transformation. Submarine school curriculum was revised in 1944 to teach surface attack tactics as the primary method, not desperate last resort. Young commanders arriving at New London learned O'Kane's techniques as standard procedure. Instructors emphasized aggression over caution. Pre-war doctrine wasn't just questioned, it was derided as outdated thinking that cost opportunities and lives. O'Kane, Fluckey, and Dealey became role models for the next generation. Their patrol reports were studied in classrooms. Their tactics were analyzed and systematized. Their aggressive mentality was cultivated deliberately. The submarine force wanted commanders who would surface in daylight, attack convoys boldly, and hunt destroyers actively. Caution became associated with failure, aggression with success. Confidence bred innovation that exceeded even surface attack tactics. In July 1945, USS Barb under Eugene Fluckey landed commandos on the Japanese coast to blow up trains. This wasn't submarine warfare, it was commando raiding from a submarine platform. Fluckey surfaced offshore, sent a demolition team ashore, and waited while they destroyed a coastal railway. The mission succeeded because Barb operated with confidence that Japanese forces couldn't threaten a surfaced submarine even in home waters. Submarines began shelling shore installations with deck guns. USS Archerfish hunted the carrier Shinano specifically, tracking the newly built vessel on the surface, positioning for attack with radar assistance, and sinking Japan's largest carrier without ever diving except to approach for the final torpedo spread. Mine-laying missions were conducted surfaced in enemy waters. The ocean had become what submariners called an American lake territory, where American submarines operated freely while Japanese forces watched helplessly. Statistical confidence validated aggressive tactics. By 1944, submarine losses were declining despite increased aggression. Of 314 submarines built during the war, only 52 were lost, a loss rate lower than the surface navy. Most losses came from mines or air attack, not destroyer depth charges. The evidence was clear. Aggressive surface tactics were safer than cautious submerged operations. Japanese anti-submarine forces couldn't kill submarines that fought back. Post-war interviews with submarine veterans revealed the depth of psychological transformation. "We realized they couldn't touch us," was a common theme. Veterans described the moment when fear transformed into confidence, when accumulated evidence proved Japanese destroyers were incompetent at anti-submarine warfare. The realization didn't come instantly, but gradually through dozens of encounters where expected threats never materialized. Some veterans expressed guilt over the one-sided nature of combat by war's end. Attacking convoys whose escorts couldn't defend them felt less like warfare than target practice. Japanese merchant sailors died helplessly, while American submarines operated with impunity. The moral weight of such asymmetric combat troubled some submariners who had expected peer combat, not systematic slaughter. Others emphasized different perspectives. They would have done the same to us if capable. Japanese forces would have exploited technological advantages just as ruthlessly. The one-sided nature of Pacific submarine warfare reflected technological and industrial realities, not American cruelty. War was about exploiting enemy weakness. American submariners had discovered Japanese anti-submarine weakness and exploited it to maximum effect. The transformation extended beyond individual psychology to institutional culture. The submarine force developed swagger and confidence that bordered on arrogance. Submariners knew they were winning the war more effectively than any other American weapon system. They knew Japanese forces couldn't stop them. They operated with certainty that surface tactics would succeed because accumulated evidence proved Japanese incapability. This confidence manifested in operational audacity that would have seemed suicidal in 1942. Submarines patrolled close to Japanese harbors, surfaced in broad daylight. They operated in waters Japanese planners considered secure. They ignored threats that early war doctrine had treated as existential. The psychological revolution was complete, from prey hiding underwater to predators hunting on the surface. By 1945, the transformation had produced a submarine force that bore little resemblance to the cautious, doctrine-bound organization of 1942. Same ships, same ocean, same enemy but completely different mentality. American submariners had learned through experience what doctrine couldn't teach, that enemy capabilities mattered more than theoretical threats. Japanese destroyers were theoretically dangerous but practically incompetent. Understanding that distinction meant the difference between caution and dominance. The legacy of this psychological transformation extended far beyond World War II. The submarine force retained its aggressive culture throughout the Cold War. Nuclear submarines inherited the confidence and tactical flexibility developed during the Pacific Campaign. The lesson endured. Innovation requires challenging doctrine. Success requires exploiting enemy weakness, and confidence based on evidence enables victory. In June 1945, 9 American submarines executed Operation Barney, the penetration of the Sea of Japan through supposedly impregnable minefields. The operation represented the culmination of surface warfare tactics and the ultimate demonstration of Japanese anti-submarine impotence. The Sea of Japan was supposed to be Japan's sanctuary, protected by 4 lines of mines laid across Tsushima Strait. Japanese merchant shipping moved freely there, believing submarines couldn't navigate the underwater barriers. FM sonar changed everything. Developed specifically to detect underwater obstacles, FM sonar emitted distinctive chimes dubbed Hell's Bells by submariners whenever mines were detected. The technology allowed submarines to map entire minefield patterns, identify safe passages, and navigate through barriers. Japanese engineers thought would stop any underwater approach. On June 4, 1945, the first 3 submarines, Sea Dog, Creval, and Spadefish, entered Tsushima Strait submerged, their FM sonar painting electronic pictures of the minefield. Hell's bells chimed constantly as submarines wove between mines spaced sometimes only 50 yards apart. After 20 hours underwater, all 3 submarines emerged safely into the Sea of Japan. 2 more groups followed. Within days, 9 American submarines were operating inside waters. Japan considered absolutely secure. Then, they all surfaced in daylight. The hunting from June 9th through June 24th, 1945, was spectacular and one-sided. The 9 submarines sank 28 ships, totaling 54,786 tons. They operated surfaced during the day, attacking convoys that continued moving as if submarines weren't present. Japanese merchant traffic maintained normal schedules, unaware that American submarines had penetrated their sanctuary. Radio intelligence showed Japanese confusion. How did submarines get through? Ultimate surface tactics emerged during Operation Barney. Submarines hunted independently while surfaced. They attacked convoys in broad daylight while Japanese shore installations watched helplessly. They used deck guns to conserve torpedoes on small targets, shelling fishing boats and coastal traffic with 4-inch shells. USS Tainosa surfaced close to shore and shelled trains moving along the Japanese coast. Coastal batteries fired back but couldn't hit the maneuvering submarine. USS Skate sank ships while Japanese shore. Batteries fired uselessly from nearby headlands. The submarines operated with complete confidence that Japanese forces couldn't threaten them. They surfaced to recharge batteries in daylight. They remained surfaced between attacks. They communicated by radio, coordinating movements and sharing target information. The Sea of Japan had become an American hunting preserve. The psychological impact on Japanese naval command was devastating. They knew American submarines had penetrated their defensive sanctuary. They couldn't counter the penetration. Radio intercepts revealed internal communications, admitting that the ocean belonged to America now. Japanese surface fleet remained trapped in harbors, unable to sortie due to fuel shortages caused by submarine destruction of tankers. American submarines patrolled off Tokyo Bay, surfaced monitoring Japanese naval movements with radar, while Japanese forces could only observe helplessly. Japanese merchant marine collapse accelerated. By August 1945, only 320,000 tons remained operational from 6 million tons in December 1941. Shipping halted except for desperate coastal convoys that moved by night and hugged shorelines. Rice from Southeast Asia couldn't reach Japan. Oil from the Dutch East Indies was cut off completely. Industrial production was collapsing from lack of raw materials. Operation Barney demonstrated that nowhere was safe from American submarines. If submarines could penetrate the Sea of Japan through 4 minefield lines, no Japanese waters were secure. The psychological defeat was total. Japanese merchant captains refused to sail. Cargo accumulated in ports with no way to transport it. The maritime logistics system that sustained Japan's empire had been destroyed by submarines that operated with impunity Japanese forces couldn't challenge. When Operation Barney submarines slipped through La Perouse Strait in June 1945, they proved something unprecedented. Total control of enemy home waters using submarines that attacked on the surface, in daylight. After 3 years of tactical evolution, the U.S. submarine force had transformed from cautious hunters into confident predators ruling the seas. The 9 submarines of Operation Barney suffered no losses or serious damage. Despite operating in dangerous, confined waters, Japanese anti-submarine forces achieved nothing. The operation confirmed that surface tactics first demonstrated by Dudley Morton in 1943 were decisive. The ocean now belonged to American submarines. Post-war analysis by the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that submarines were the most effective weapon in the Pacific War. They sank 1,314 Japanese ships, totaling 5.3 million tons, over half of Japan's merchant losses. This destruction crippled Japan's economy at unmatched cost-effectiveness, largely due to surface tactics perfected in 1943-44. The reasons were clear. Japanese anti-submarine doctrine assumed submarines would hide. American boats defied this, using radar, superior fire control, and aggressive surface maneuvers. Japan's technology lagged, its training declined, and its rigid doctrine collapsed under American innovation. As one captured Japanese commander admitted, "American submarines fought like surface ships we had no counter." Operation Barney's success reshaped post-war strategy. U.S. doctrine kept emphasizing surface capabilities, even as nuclear power allowed submarines to stay submerged indefinitely. The Soviet Navy, analyzing Japan's failure, resolved never to repeat its technological inferiority. The key lessons about technology gaps, training quality, and tactical flexibility guided submarine warfare throughout the Cold War. The heroes of this transformation became legends. Richard O'Kane, Sam Dealey, Eugene Fluckey, and Dudley Morton each embodied aggressive, independent command. Their tactics doubled submarine effectiveness and redefined naval warfare. By 1944, the results were undeniable. In 1942, submarines sank 180 ships for 725,000 tons, mostly through traditional submerged attacks. In 1944, they sank 492 ships, totaling 2.38 million tons, primarily using surface tactics. Same submarines, same ocean, different mindset. Confidence replaced caution, producing a 1.6 million ton increase in destruction. Japan's merchant marine was annihilated, strangling its war economy. Victory came not from battleships, but from submarines daring to fight in daylight. The enduring lesson is timeless. Doctrine must yield to reality. Those who master technology and possess the courage to use it boldly will dominate the seas. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.